With less than 2 weeks to go to the 2013 NFL Draft, there seems to be now a general consensus forming that I'm even having to agree with, is that Luke Joeckel, the offensive tackle from Texas A&M, more likely than not at this point, will be the first overall selection in this draft by the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, on the surface, there's quite a bit to like about Luke Joeckel. He's 6'6", about 310 pounds, has definitely the look of a prototypical blindside protecting left tackle in the NFL. He's an All-American, an award winner. He really held up well against the SEC in 2012. He's playing against some of the best pass rush talent in all of college football, and he more than held his own, and he helped protect the blind side of Heisman Trophy winner Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football. So there's quite a bit to like about Luke Joeckel. But the ultimate question to me is, should Luke Joeckel be the first pick in the 2013 NFL Draft? The Kansas City Chiefs got their position picking number one the old-fashioned way. They earned it. And usually when you have the number one overall choice, in my opinion, you're looking for some combination of any four of these things. Number one, you're looking for a franchise quarterback. Because obviously if you suck that bad to where you got the number one overall pick, chances are your quarterback sucks or you don't even have one to begin with. So you're looking at that position first and foremost because it's the most important position. Problem is in the 2013 draft, a lot of scouts and general managers, executives, talking heads, what have you, believe there isn't a franchise quarterback in this draft. And definitely not one worth taking number one overall, which obviously the Chiefs felt that way because of the dumb trade they did for Alex Smith. You're also maybe looking for an all-pro, Hall of Fame type talent. And when you look at this draft, it may be deep and it may have a lot of good players, but I think you could argue, at least on the surface, that this 2013 draft looks like it's lacking for all-pro or Hall of Fame talent. Similarly, maybe to a 2010 draft. I think in general, this draft reminds me more of 2008 or 2011, but I'll get to that in a little bit. If nothing else fails, if you don't have the ability to get a franchise quarterback at number one, and you don't have the ability to get an all-pro or Hall of Fame talent, you're at least looking for the number one player in that draft class. Well, the problem is in 2013, there's not really a consensus on who that number one overall player is. And that kind of ties into the fourth thing. When all these other things come into play, whether they're there, present, or not, you may want to trade out of that number one overall pick because chances are if you go 1-15, or in the case of the Chiefs, you went 2-14, you're so bad that you probably have more than one need, more than just one individual position. And you like to maybe be able to trade back a few spots, pick up additional picks, and address other holes and improve talent throughout your roster. Well, the problem is, with an apparent lack of franchise quarterbacks, a lack of all-pro and Hall of Fame talent, and not even really a clear-cut number one player, not many teams, I think, are going to be willing to pay the price that it would be required to trade up to the number one overall selection, which does kind of leave the Kansas City Chiefs in quite a bit of a quandary. Now, there are a few arguments that can be made in favor of Luke Joeckel being the number one overall selection in this draft. First, I look at the fact that Andy Reid is the head coach. He loves taking offensive and defensive linemen in the first round. He believes in it. And, if you believe in something, you might as well do something that fits with your belief system. So if he believes in taking offensive linemen in the first round, well, here's a guy right here in Luke Joeckel that seems to fit the bill of what Andy Reid wants. Now, when you look at Joeckel, you also keep in mind, too, is that he doesn't have a lot of bust potential to him. He really doesn't. And he looks like a guy that is going to be a safe pick in a draft full of uncertainty. He might be one of the few safe picks. He might not end up being the number one overall player out of this draft 5 years from now, but he's not going to be a bust. And they may be key for a team like the Kansas City Chiefs in this position. They already went and got their quarterback in Alex Smith, so they've taken that out of the equation. They're a team that doesn't have a bare talent covered. They have guys like Jamal Charles and Dwayne Bowe on offense. Brandon Albert's still technically at the moment as well. On the defensive side of the ball, you got guys like Tamba Lee and Derek Johnson, Justin Houston, and Eric Berry. There's talent to be had on that team. So maybe plugging in somebody like a Luke Joeckel on that offensive line, you can improve your offense both in the running game and the passing game, and you're not taking a whole lot of risk. And to keep in kind of that theme of not taking a lot of risk, there are 3 times in the past 50 years where an offensive tackle has been chosen #1 overall. It was 1968, Ron Yary went to the Minnesota Vikings out of USC. He ended up being the fixture at right tackle for all those great Vikings teams of the 70s, you know, the ones that went to 4 Super Bowls. Even though they lost them all, Ron Yary was there, multiple-time All-Pro, Pro Bowler, and eventual Hall of Famer. Orlando Pace went #1 overall to the Rams in 1997 out of Ohio State. And he was a fixture on the line that won the Super Bowl in 1999 and went to the Super Bowl again in 2001. That greatest show on turf, it didn't hurt to have a very good offensive line, and it really helped Kurt Warner to have Orlando Pace protecting his blind side. And you look at what Jake Long in the Miami Dolphins in 2008. He's not nearly, I think, at the level necessarily of a Ron Yary or an Orlando Pace, but he hasn't been a bust either. And when he was drafted by the Miami Dolphins, you know, it was a situation similar to this one in 2013, where a lot of people didn't feel there was a real franchise quarterback. Well, a lot of people didn't feel there was a lot of All-Pro or Hall of Fame talent, and there wasn't really a clear-cut #1 player, so the Miami Dolphins went with the safe pick. And Jake Long didn't end up being a bust. Now he's ended up leaving in free agency to go to St. Louis, but he ended up being a very good blindside protector for a few years. You know, helped improve that Miami Dolphins organization once he got there, no question about it. So there are arguments to be made for taking Luke Joeckel #1 overall, especially for the Kansas City Chiefs. I just feel that they're very bad arguments, and ultimately I don't agree with it, and I don't agree that Luke Joeckel should be the #1 overall pick at all. To me personally, in my opinion, I think it's a tremendous mistake for the Kansas City Chiefs to take Luke Joeckel #1 overall. Now, they may have painted themselves into this corner where they have no choice, but that still doesn't mean that they painted themselves into a corner to make the right choice. In fact, I think it could be a tragically wrong choice. When you look at Luke Joeckel, there's questions about whether he's the #1 player in this entire draft or not. So that gives me reason to pause right there. On top of that, I could make the argument that he might not be the best long-term left tackle prospect in this entire draft. That may very well be Eric Fisher of Central Michigan, and maybe the wild card people out there may want to argue Lane Johnson from Oklahoma will end up being the best left tackle in this draft. So should you really take a guy #1 overall if you're not sure that he's the #1 player overall, and he might not even be the best guy at his position? Now let's take a look at the 2008 Miami Dolphins. They did take Jake Long #1 overall after their 2007 season where they finished 1-15. And, you know, at the time, like I said, there wasn't a widely viewed franchise quarterback. There wasn't a lot of All-Pro Hall of Fame talent in that draft, allegedly. And it seemed to lack a clear-cut #1 player, so they took the safe route. The problem is they took the safe route, just like the St. Louis Rams kind of did at #2 with Chris Long, and both of those dumb organizations ended up paying the price because the Atlanta Falcons took Matt Ryan #3 overall. Back then, I thought Matt Ryan could be a franchise quarterback. Apparently, a lot of NFL general managers did not agree. Thomas Dimitroff agreed with me, and he ended up being right. And what did teams like the Miami Dolphins and St. Louis Rams end up doing a few years later? The Rams had to take Sam Bradford #1 overall in 2010. The Dolphins ended up having to take a quarterback anyways, 8th overall in 2012, and Ryan Tannehill. And now they're rebuilding again, this time around Tannehill. And the Rams had to rebuild around Sam Bradford. Imagine, especially we'll stick to the case of the Miami Dolphins, if they would have passed on Jake Long and said, we'll take Matt Ryan. You could potentially be talking about the Miami Dolphins potentially as a Super Bowl contender now. Not as a team that's rebuilding around a young quarterback in Tannehill. They could have already had that young quarterback in place that was establishing himself as a franchise guy, bordering on elite, and you could be rocking and rolling in the AFC East. The Dolphins still are paying the price for taking Jake Long over Matt Ryan in 2008, especially because of the fact now Jake Long's not even there anymore. He left for nothing. He went to the St. Louis Rams. The Dolphins got nothing for it. And they don't have Matt Ryan. They're rebuilding around Ryan Tannehill. You also look at the precedent of the left tackle position. I talked about how it's being viewed more and more in NFL circles as a drastically more important position than some others. But I think in some ways, when it comes to the draft, that the left tackle position is very overrated. Now, the consensus tends to be is that left tackles tend to have a lower bust potential, and that may very well be the case. But ultimately, the game of football is about winning championships, Super Bowl titles. And when you look at it, since the 1996 season, we've had a total of 4, and I'll emphasize that again, 4 left tackles that were chosen by their team in the first round that started on a Super Bowl winner. That was John Michaels in 1996 for the Green Bay Packers, who replaced an injured Ken Rutgers, who was a first-round pick of the Packers back in '85, I believe it was. That's one. You had Orlando Pace on that '99 Rams team. He was their #1 overall choice in 1997. Jonathan Ogden in the 2000 Baltimore Ravens. He was a former first-round pick for the Ravens, as well as Tariq Glenn for the Indianapolis Colts in 2006 on that title team. He was their first-round choice in '97. But that's it. 4 of them in a 17-year stretch. 4 left tackles chosen in the first round by their team ended up playing on a winning Super Bowl team. So more often than not, what does that suggest? That you don't have to draft your left tackle in the first round in order to win the Super Bowl. In fact, there are plenty of cases where you find a guy in the lower rounds of the draft. Or you sit there and you find a guy off the scrap heap in free agency. See Bryant McKinney for the freaking Baltimore Ravens this year. The bottom line is, Luke Joeckel is not necessarily the #1 player in this draft. He's not even necessarily the #1 player at his own position in this draft. If the Chiefs end up taking him, they're going to repeat the same mistake of the 2008 Miami Dolphins, passing on a quarterback who will end up being a better player, that ends up being a franchise quarterback, who in a couple of years they're going to have to end up taking one any damn ways, and at some point in time, Joeckel might end up leaving any fucking ways. And with the precedent of only 4 left tackles in the past 17 years being first-round picks of their team, starting in the Super Bowl for a Super Bowl champion, history clearly suggests that left tackle is not all that important of a position. 3 offensive tackles have been taken #1 overall in the past 50 years. One of them's in the Hall of Fame, that's Ron Yary, but he played right tackle. The second one, Orlando Pace, may end up someday in the Hall of Fame. And the third one, Jake Long, wasn't even the best left tackle in the AFC. That's Joe Thomas. Or you could argue somebody else maybe. But it definitely wasn't Jake Long. And the Miami Dolphins still are paying the price for taking Jake Long #1 overall in 2008. The bottom line is, if the Kansas City Chiefs think he's a safe pick, they may be on the right wavelength in their own minds. But history will end up proving them wrong, that going safe wasn't the way to go, drafting a left tackle wasn't the way to go, and ultimately drafting Luke Joeckel #1 overall was not the way to go.